And welcome to Off the Couch, where psychology meets everyday life. I'm Dr. Greg Cason, and I'm here. I'm a psychologist, and I'm here with producer Brian Gomez.
Happy Monday, you guys.
He's joining the conversation. Today on Off the Couch, we're going to be talking about some studies that came out this week in psychology. Can therapy against spider fears reduce your fear of heights? Are siblings bad for your mental health? And what your Zoom background says about you. And for Psychology in the News, we're going to talk about, should you yell fire in a crowded theater? The answer may surprise you. But first, let's talk about fears. Brian, what are you afraid of?
Oh, okay.
What phobias? Oh, you got a list.
I think my two main, well, there's a few things I guess I would say. Heights for sure. I'm not a fan of heights. The dark is a little uneasy for me. And I hate like any bug that can bite me for sure. Like, yeah, no, not for me.
Well, I mean, no one likes to be bitten by a bug, but are you afraid of them? Do you have a phobia?
Oh, definitely.
Oh, okay.
I had my manager in my apartment complex and my neighbors all come to like this little yard like a few months ago because there was this huge spider, not even on my window, but it was close to my window, and I couldn't let it go, and I thought it's going to come in at some point, and like, no.
Okay. Well, and also we have engineer Tony. Tony, good to see you. Tell me, what you might be afraid of?
The two most are heights.
Heights.
Because my brother threw me off the house when I was a little boy, and I think that did it.
Oh, yeah.
And snakes, because he threw a snake around me. Or at me when I was a little boy, too. So I blame it on him. So.
The trauma is caused by the sibling. Right. Got it.
I really only have one, and that is fear of heights as well. So we all share in that. We should all, go on a Ferris wheel together. Let's talk about this. So I'm going to talk about the 5 most common phobias, and then I'm going to talk about this study that really is, in my field, pretty amazing. So the 5 most common phobias: claustrophobia, or fear of enclosed or confined spaces. I don't have that. I mean, I actually kind of like sometimes being in a small space. Fear of heights, which is acrophobia. That's what we all share. Social phobias, which is fear of social situations and social interactions. We also have the glossophobia, which is a fear of public speaking. That is many times, that kind of moves to the front of the line. The fear of social situations moves to the front of the line. Those are very common fears. And of course, arachnophobia, which is fear of spiders. But we see this kind of fear also of biting bugs, or like you had, Brian. So that's not unusual. So let's talk about that. They did a study. It's Ruhr University Bochum in Germany, and they did a therapy against spider fear study. So they studied 50 people with both a fear of spiders and a fear of heights. And then they did the study and they published it in the Journal of Translational Psychiatry. So they treated the 50 people with the spider phobia, and they did a treatment called exposure with response prevention. So exposure with response prevention, some people might know that treatment if you took a psych class a while back as flooding. That's an old term. We don't really use that anymore, but it's basically when you put somebody toward a situation or in a situation that's going to cause them some fear. We saw this in the movies, who's the guy? Harrison Ford. He was in the movie with who knows? It's the ride at Disneyland, and I'm completely forgetting.
Now, if you wouldn't have said
he had it, yeah. So this guy, I'm sure everyone at home is
Indiana Jones
yelling. Yes, Indiana Jones. He was dropped into. He had a fear of snakes, and he's dropped into a vat of snakes, and he had to take a breath. I mean, he was completely frozen for a second, absolutely in terror, and then suddenly he kind of got it together and pulled himself out of this situation. So that was probably the most dramatic exposure I've ever seen. But usually with fear of spiders, you do things like you write down the name spider, you might show them a picture of spiders, you might have them touch the picture, you might show them videos of spiders, then you might have a real spider in the room, and then you might have them come closer to the spider. So So it's a series of progressive exposures. And during that time, so when they did this therapy, they measured the fear of spiders and they measured the fear of heights before and after the treatment. So the measurements were both subjective of their fears, and they did some objective measures as well. So what we all did, we reported what our fears were, and then people took some survey and they said, this is my fear. The objective was actually really key. They had them actually, either get close to a spider, see how close they could come or would be willing to come, and also could they climb this church tower. So both those were very helpful measures. Then they measured. Then they did the treatment, but climbing the church tower actually kind of reminded me. I was just in Florence this summer, and then we went to the Duomo in Florence, which is Santa Maria del Fiore. This is the main church in town, if you will. And they had a tour there, and you could climb the enclosed stairs. It was 463 steep stairs. And some people didn't want to do it because of the enclosed space of the area that you're climbing. And I'm like, that doesn't bother me at all. We can go up the stairs, go up to the top and look at the view. That's fantastic. Then they said, well, then you have to go out on that catwalk and walk all the way around. And I'm like, oh, you know what? I can pass on this because you're just towering above the church floor, and it was just terrifying, and I just said no. But spiders I don't seem to have the issue with, thank goodness. I've even had some big spiders, allowed them to crawl on me in Mexico as part of a nature thing, which was kind of cool. But what they did find when the people did this study, the study researchers did that exposure therapy just for the spiders. They didn't do it for heights, but they did it just for the spiders. They found that the exposure therapy, which we already know in psychology, that exposure therapy works. It works very well. So the fear of spiders is reduced significantly in both subjective and objective measures. People could get closer to spiders. Maybe they could touch spiders. They certainly could talk about them, etc. So all of that was good. But they also found that the people's fear of heights was reduced by 15% due to exposure to the spiders. 15%. So just by doing exposure to spiders, people's height fears got better. And this is actually pretty... this was theoretically done because we start to look at in psychology these kind of universal protocols. Are there certain things we can do to help people to get better that we don't have to address every single problem? So they've tried to look at what explains this, and they couldn't really figure it out. There are some theories. They don't think it's associative learning. This is for the psychologists who might be listening. They don't think it's classical conditioning like the Pavlov's dog stuff. They think that associative learning, just so you know, it's kind of assessing the relationship between things and how they're connected. And, you do it through different learning patterns like Pavlov's dog with the bell, thinking the food's coming, etc. So the reduction of fear appears to have generalized. So that's what we say, this skill seems to have generalized. It's gone on to something else, and it's gone on to another stimulus or another thing. Here, the thought is it's increased self-efficacy due to exposure therapy. I know I'm throwing out a lot of terms here. I won't do that all the time, but let me tell you what self-efficacy is. It's different than self-esteem. Self-efficacy is really your belief in your ability to do something. So self-efficacy, when it increases, when you see that you can handle this spider fear, people feel more empowered. So the theory is, in fact, that people feel more empowered. They feel stronger. They feel like they can attack things better because they attack their spider fear. So I thought that was pretty damn cool.
What? Oh, nothing. I'm also scared of bees. I forgot to say. I'm terrified of bees, and I'm not even allergic.
Well, we don't know if this works with bee phobias, but I would say that, addressing the spider phobia first might really be helpful in your fear of heights. So, are siblings bad for your mental health? Boy, yeah. Tony says yes.
I feel like universally everybody.
Brian says yes. I will certainly say absolutely. I had a really weird family situations. So I grew up, I have a brother who's 1 year older. He's intellectually disabled, and I have a sister who's 6 years younger. I have two stepsisters, one who's 1 year older, one is 3 years older, and I have a half sister who is essentially my age. So we've got a lot going on in that clan. So anyway, but are siblings bad for your mental health? Brian thinks they perhaps are. Everyone says yes. So this study looked at mental health and having siblings or not having siblings. So this is pretty cool because I've always thought that all my friends who didn't have siblings growing up, I thought they were so lucky because they got to like not have to share a room, and they didn't have to like pile in the back of the car and ride in the very just always getting the scraps. So I thought this was kind of cool. But this study was done by the Ohio State University, and it featured the work of the sociology doctoral candidate Rui Chow. And I'm talking about that because just on an offsite, this is once again, it looks like dissertation research. So this is done by this person. So, some cool research sometimes comes from people who are first coming up in their doctoral programs, and Doug Downey was the lead author. This was published in the Journal of Family Studies. So they did this study both in China and the United States. This is interesting because it's two entirely different cultures in so many ways, but especially around having children. So you guys think that having children, you actually think that indeed having siblings is bad for your mental health, but what do you think? What do you think they found in China?
Oh, they're a lot more strict on that end over there. It might not be as bad there. I know it causes there's little things that everybody seems to know about, like middle child syndrome or being the oldest, and you're like put with more things that you have to worry about, or like being the baby. So it definitely does take a toll, but if you don't have a big family, I feel like it's going to be a bit different.
Well, it's interesting because Child has had a one-child policy. So it is so many people in China only have one sibling in their family. But sometimes some families have more than one. What do you think, Tony?
About China or just...
Yeah, China.
That's what my thought was. I know they have a limit on the amount of children that they can have. I don't know what their limit is now, or but yeah, I don't think they have the same issues as we do because they're kind of a tighter knit family than majority of Americans.
Well, they definitely have a different culture, definitely tighter knit, definitely the families are a little more together. But other studies have shown that having more siblings is associated with positive effects. Having more siblings is associated with better social relations. I don't know, but I can sit in a room full of people and I'm not bothered by it, or I can talk to people and kind of deal with things. And so in some ways I see that skill that we gained in a sometimes chaotic household. Well, the findings are teenagers from larger families from larger families have poorer mental health than families who have fewer siblings. So the more siblings these teens had, the worse their mental health. And that effect was found in both China and the United States. So, other findings. In China, the teens with no siblings at all, the one-child policy kids, actually had the best mental health. This is so cool.
Amen to that.
The United States, they had much better mental health when they had no or one sibling. So just having one sibling's okay. It's when you get up there. It gets messy. The worst impacts are having older siblings and having siblings closely spaced in age tended to have the worst impact on well-being in the United States. That pretty much describes my family.
Can I give an example?
What? An example?
There's 4 of us.
Yes.
I'm the baby. There's 8, 7, and 6 years. They were all a year apart. And then a big gap in me. I'm the most normal one. They're all kind of messed up. So that might prove your point.
There you go. Siblings born within 1 year of each other had the strongest negative association with mental health.
Snap.
There you go. That is a finding from the study. So why? What's the thing? So the theory, they don't know exactly why, but there are certain theories that might hold here. So resource delusion is one of the theories. So that theory is kind of like, imagine your parental resources are like a pie, and when it's one child, they get the whole pie. But when you have two kids, you have to slice the pie in half. Or the older child might insist on getting even more of the pie, let's say. Mm-hmm. So, all the attention and resources get divided up. But the more kids, the kind of more things get, apportioned in weird ways. And I'm wondering for you, Tony, if it was like half a pie was those three kids and the other half was you. Who knows if you had
because
that
they
kind
always
of
said
division.
Tony got everything he wanted.
Yeah, that's my youngest sister, Michelle. She was 6 years younger, and that sort of the break. We were all close together,
Right.
but she's 6 years younger. And then that was sort of everyone's opinion.
Yeah.
Hi, Michelle.
You're the best.
So you add siblings, and there are fewer resources and less attention, and closely spaced have to compete for the same types of parental resources. They also think this could be selectivity. Now, selectivity is a little bit different. It's sort of like the people who choose to have more than one kid, or people who choose to have one kid. So meaning maybe one-child families are just inherently different than families with many children. So not surprisingly, families from children from families associated with the most socioeconomic disadvantage. Oh, I'm sorry. Children associated with the most socioeconomic advantage, the rich kids, they had the best mental health. Lucky them. They get everything. So the kids that had a little more money on hand, a little more resources, seemed to do better. And that's why this theory looked kind of interesting. So one-child families in China were the most socioeconomically advantaged. One- and two-child families in the United States were the most socioeconomically advantaged. What was not measured was the quality of the sibling relationships. And this was interesting to me because I'm like, but it's like the relationships are all different. We all interact differently. We have different ways of doing things. We all have our own personalities. And some of it didn't depend on our parents. So, yeah, I don't know. That was just not measured as part of this. But there are some previous studies that show that higher quality relationships have more positive effects on mental health. So if you're good with your brother and sister, etc., then it's going to have more positive effects. I guess if you're in the rich family, there's only one or two of you. Siblings are not all bad, though. I love all of mine. I really do. I mean, especially what's great about siblings is you grow up. So, now I consider them all very, very dear. I don't know that I always held that opinion when I was a kid, but
I don't think any of us did, actually.
Maybe still don't.
I think they're all amazing. All of them had things that were just, I had one sister who is just. All of them very popular, beautiful, and the one was valedictorian, it's all these things. And I just existed in the shadow. So more brothers and sisters associated with better social skills among kindergartners. So if you have a lot of brothers and sisters, you're pretty good in kindergarten. That's that can be helpful, good launch. And also lower likelihood of adult divorce. Not that childhood divorce happens a lot. So a lower likelihood of divorce. So that's kind of nice. Okay, what your Zoom background says about you. Please, if you are watching this show, you can note my background here. What I have in the background for people who are just listening is a picture of the logo Off the Couch with Dr. Greg. It's kind of in a cartoon sort of setup and a video screen behind me, and I'm just talking. So keep that in mind as we talk. The pandemic really made Zoom ubiquitous. It just happened everywhere. We all went to Zoom. We all pretty much used that platform. Maybe some other ones were used, FaceTime, etc. But we all looked at people's Zooms and we all made judgments. Say it. We all did it. It wasn't just what people said or what they did or what their hair looked like that day. We looked at what what went on in the background. Did they make their bed? Do they clean up? What is that? Why do they have that book? Do they not water their plants? Come on, you guys thought this? No?
No, yeah, definitely. I had to be on Zoom through school, so I would see, at mornings, people aren't dressed, people don't even have their camera on. Yeah, it was a big discussion for sure.
Nothing is worse when you're doing a Zoom call and somebody doesn't turn their camera on. And as somebody who had to give lectures where people kept their cameras off, it's like talking at a blank wall. I know they're doing it because they're probably not even in front of the computer. I get it, but they're just talking to a blank wall. I'm just saying we all judge things. The predictions estimate 75% of business meetings will occur through video conferencing in 2024. So it's all very important. But we look at things, we make judgments on people's backgrounds based on so many things, including things like their socioeconomic status or their heritage or their priorities, sometimes disabilities. And sometimes we can say things like messy table might be an indication of personality. An unmade bed means that they have a lack of attention to detail, not that they were just in a lot of hurry. So we all have these first impressions. So this study, it was done at Durham University in North Carolina, Department of Psychology, and they wanted to know what were the snap impressions of backgrounds. What were the snap first impressions? We already did studies on faces and voices. They want to know the snap first impressions of backgrounds. So they did a study looking at the physical environments of Zoom calls. It was published in the PLOS One journal, which is it's a respectable, and study recruited 167 participants, both from online and undergraduates in psychology classes at Durham University. So they had 115 females, 50 males, and 2 non-binary individuals, and they were ages 19 to 68. So they did have some age gap, which is kind of nice. So they looked at male and female photos, and let's go ahead and put that up, and I'll kind of describe what they did. They looked at all white, and why they did is they wanted to control for unconscious bias, because a lot of people, when they look at other races, they might have unconscious bias that will skew their rating. So they made everyone the same race. They had 18 male faces and 18 female faces, and I could not tell from reading the study, maybe I didn't read it closely enough, nor the example that they put up, which if you're watching the video, you can see we have a panel of 6 individual faces that represent each of the individual Zoom backgrounds. Ages all appear to be college age, which could also skew some people's impressions, but nonetheless, that's what they had. The impressions of the study, they had 18 male, 18 female. They had both happy and neutral faces. And they did 6 different backgrounds. They really controlled this. 6 different backgrounds. They did a home, a blurred, a bookcase, plants, and a novelty background. Do we have any others? Oh, yeah, blank. Blank is kind of boring. Blank is just a white screen. Novelty background is, those pictures when people have like some kind of travel photo behind them, or maybe some cartoon scene or something, and when they're talking, it blurs into their face, or when they move, it's very distracting. But nonetheless, that's a novelty background, and I think this could my in the studio background could qualify as a novelty background. And then they rated levels of competence and trustworthiness of the speaker. They didn't tell them they were looking at the backgrounds. They just said, here are these things. Tell us how competent or trustworthy this person appears. And they didn't tell them what they were evaluating, whether it's a neutral face or smiling face, man or woman, background, etc. Here's what they found. The plants or a bookcase in the background significantly increased ratings of trust and competence. So if you want good trust and competence, have plants or a bookcase. Living room or a novelty background had significantly lower ratings. Here we got a novelty background here, but living room stuff or any kind of furniture stuff seem to lower ratings. And blank or blurred backgrounds, as boring as that is, that's somewhere in between. If you have a smiling or a female face, people saw you as generally more trustworthy and more competent. Smiling or female. Neutral expressions, there was no difference in trust or competence. And when you're seated in front of a glance or a bookcase. So if you don't smile, it's pretty neutral. And male faces were significantly less competent. Male faces significantly less competent if in a living room, blank wall, or you guessed it, novelty background. So they take it for what you will here, but I could be seen as less competent at this very point. Advice, clean up the background. I mean, folks, if people are looking at your background, you're losing them. You're losing the message, whatever it is. Put some plants or a bookcase behind you. That's kind of an easy fix. That's kind of good. And if you can't control your background, smiling helps. And wear nice clothes. Don't distract. Remember, clothes are actually part of the environment. Okay. I want to talk about psychology in the news. So I want to start talking about, I was rewatching one of my favorite movies the other night. It was Quentin Tarantino's Jackie Brown. Do you guys know this movie? Starring Pam Grier, who used to be Foxy Brown and Coffee. She's just amazing. Anyway, I take it, maybe not. But I will tell you, it's a fantastic movie. I've seen it many times. Well, this was the first time I noticed that the casting was done by someone named Jackie Brown. Spelled differently, but still it kind of threw me off. I'm like, oh. So I texted a movie buff friend of mine to ask him if he knew about it. I thought, if anyone's going to know, he'll know. He didn't know. And then he was asking me, oh, you're watching that movie again? I love that movie. It's one of his best, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going back and forth and talking about this. And I told him about the first time seeing the movie. And here's the thing. The first time I saw this movie, I only saw about a third of it. I went to a theater in Santa Barbara, and it was a broken up theater. Just to give you this visual, I went into the theater. You had to go upstairs, and they had converted this balcony into a theater. So we were in like the balcony section, but it was a theater, and it was steep stadium style seating. So I'm sitting there. We went upstairs and we were watching this movie. It's great. About a third of the way through, and we start to smell smoke. So a woman from the theater went out. She goes, I'm going to check it out, because we're all like, whoa, what's going on? And she came back and she yelled, "There's a fire." Now, I'm in a crowded movie theater, and someone just yelled fire. Now, in my psychology classes, this would always be an example that was given. Don't yell fire in a crowded theater. In fact, it's considered very poor judgment. You never yell fire in a crowded theater. We hear this all the time. So what happened next really surprised me, and it reminded me of these two news stories I just heard. So 2 recent news stories, 2 disasters. Alaska Airlines Flight 1282, which had the, everyone knows, is the one where the door blew off mid-flight, and the Avalanche in the ski resort in Palisades, Tahoe. So let's first talk about the door being sucked off mid-flight on the Alaska Airlines flight. It was on a Boeing 737 MAX 9 jet. It lost a door-sized section of the fuselage, so the door just popped right off mid-flight. They were 6 minutes after takeoff. They'd just taken off. And what happens when you just take off in a plane? You're about 6 minutes up. You start getting restless. Some people stand up. They have to go to the bathroom. There's probably all kinds of action going on. All of a sudden, they just passed 10,000 feet. They hear a loud boom. And then the plane filled with wind and noise. Nobody could even talk. The oxygen masks dropped. A 15-year-old boy who is sitting nearby had his shirt sucked off. At least 2 phones got sucked out, because they've recovered them later. And it was just, as one person reports, total chaos as everyone scrambled to secure themselves. So the 15-year-old boy he moved away from the door. He moved next to this woman. And then I guess there was there was no one, thank God, sitting at the seat where the plane, where the door blew off. But the other two people did leave. The other two people in the middle row and in the aisle, right on the aisle where the door blew off, scrambled to switch aisles. So they switched it to the other side. So everyone got secured and put on their oxygen masks. So this is an account by one of the passengers, Kelly Bartlett. I never felt like we were going to crash. It was windy and loud in the plane, but everyone was calm, and we landed safely within 15 minutes. Bartlett also wrote that then all got off the plane just like normal. No need for emergency slides. We just walked out the jetway as usual. Then she took a selfie to commemorate the experience with the 15-year-old she identified as Jack. Let's get that selfie up there. If you are watching, you will see a woman with an oxygen mask on next to a shirtless boy, also with an oxygen mask. He's giving a thumbs up, and she looks rather cheerful. And there they are, just a few rows from the door that had been blown off as they were on their way down. So she continues, the flight attendants really responded well to the situation. They got everything safe, and they got themselves safe. And then there was nothing to do but wait, right? We were just on our way down, and it was just a normal descent. It felt normal, with the exception of the oxygen mask, the cold air, and the wind and the noise. There were 177 passengers on the plane and crew. There were 177 both passengers and crew. The plane had gotten to the altitude of 16,300 feet. Thank God it wasn't higher, because that could have really spelled disaster. Now let's go to the other one. The Avalanche in Palisades, Tahoe. This was snowboarder Jason Parker, he's 52, was buried alive on an avalanche on KT-22. I don't know this ski resort, but apparently this is an infamous double diamond. It's a double black diamond, it's run that's very, very steep. And he noted some snow coming down, and he thought that was just another skier. Because sometimes when you're skiing and you're on a steep slope, someone can knock snow off, and that can happen. He didn't hear a roar or a crack. He just heard the wind howling, and he just says, Jason Parker says, I didn't hear it. I just felt the snow hit me, and it flipped me on my back. And he says his fiance heard him say, "Oh shit," but he doesn't remember saying that. He just reports it was like a river flowing down. So he was caught in this river of snow, but it wasn't actually a river. It was an avalanche that he was in. And Parker felt his body accelerate and the snow massing above him. So he felt more and more snow. He screamed, "Watch me, watch me," because he wanted people to see where he ended up. And he didn't have a beacon. For those people who might know, skiing, sometimes when you ski in more dangerous situations, you might carry a beacon, which is like a little radio transmitter that they can find your location if they need to. He knew there was nothing he could do at that moment but to let the river take him. And as the skiers on the lift watched above him in horror. So he continued to accelerate, and he could feel more and more snow, and he became compacted around his body. Finally, he stopped, and he thought, he stopped. He thought, wow, I think I'm going to be okay. He didn't get hit. He didn't get pushed off a cliff. He just got to the end and stopped, except he was under 4 feet of snow, and nobody could see him. So he was invisible to the outside world. He just couldn't move. He also said the rest of the slide was still coming, so it just entombed him, and everything went black. He screamed for help, but he realized he needed to conserve his oxygen, and he just lay there in the blackness alone. So he said, Parker says, "It's weird. I don't know how to explain this. I really did just slow my breathing, and I started to tell myself, I think this is it." He said, I kind of made peace with it. And he could feel himself losing consciousness, and he was surprised how calm he felt. There's that word again. Then he felt a sharp poke in his back a little while later, and it awakened him. He said, "Awakened me." He felt a wave of emotion, and he thought, I'm going to be okay. They're going to get me. Now, they did get him out. His fiancée immediately threw her arms around him. Ski patrol asked him things like his name. Do you know where you are? Are you hurt? He wasn't badly hurt. One of his knees was hyperextended. They offered to carry him down the mountain. He refused. He snowboarded down. He and his fiancée made their way to the car, and later people were asking, how did you do that? Like, how did you just walk away from that? And he said adrenaline, which I think is a correct response. And he later found that one skier, 66-year-old man, was killed in the avalanche. There were other people who were buried as well.
That story was traumatizing just to even hear.
It's scary. As a skier, it's a scary thing. But those two very, very scary incidents both had one thing, which is they had this, both people seemed to be rather calm through these situations. So what's happening? When we have a very frightening situation, we have what's called a sympathetic nervous response. We have the parasympathetic system and the sympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system actually is responsible for our rapid, involuntary response to dangerous or stressful situations. It does things like it causes your blood pressure to rise, you speeds up your heart rate, increases your sweating, dilates the pupil, improves your vision, delivers more blood to areas that need it, that need oxygen. It increases your arousal and attention. So all of this stuff is going on. And we might think that it might be like the movies when in a dangerous situation and people are just flailing their arms and running about chaotically. But that isn't what happened. It really seemed to be that we always say when people go into the sympathetic nervous system response, they have a fight, flight, or freeze response. But I'll hold that there might be a fourth way, which is focus, because the increased arousal and attention seem to be at play with these people. And that brings us back to Jackie Brown. The woman had come into that theater. She yelled fire in a crowded movie theater. But what happened next really astounded me. At the time, I thought it was weird. But it was happening with me, too. We all just got up extremely calmly and walked down the steep movie theater steps. And there was only one aisle that we could go down. There weren't separate aisles. It was, very little narrow, tiny little theater. And we were all walking down the movie theater steps. And it was like church. One row, one row, one row, one row. No one pushed. No one said anything. People were all extremely calm. And then we got to the door, and of course, it was a wall of smoke. So what do? And they're like, and then we had to get down, like, to get down when you encounter smoke, just FYI to people, get as low as you can. So I think they were yelling, maybe crawl. I don't remember, but I do remember someone kept yelling, screaming, follow my voice, follow my voice. And we were in a balcony situation, so you didn't want to go down the stairs into the main lobby because, of course, that's where the fire was going on. So they go, follow my voice. So it was off to the left, and turns out that there was a fire exit on the side of the sort of landing on the outside of the theater. So we followed the voice. And I just crawled till I got closer and closer to the voice. And I remember seeing other people crawling too. So there were people coming from different things, but it was almost as if we were in line. And they go, follow my voice. And I got to the doorway and there was somebody there. And then he helped me up. And then I walked down the stairs and outside. It was just the most weird thing. And, we're outside and we hung around because it was just like, how do you process this? And bottom line, we kind of just went home. What do you do? At that point. But it was a very, very strange thing. I will say the theater staff, they were the ones yelling, "Follow my voice." It wasn't emergency personnel. The theater staff, people paid probably minimum wage, were the ones getting us out. So I have to hand it to that theater, and I can't even name that theater now. This happened back, I was trying to guesstimate, because I remember exactly the class I was in my master's program. I think it was in 1990. And I remember telling a professor that this happened, and he said, "Well, you should never yell fire in a crowded movie theater." And I'm like, well, I know that's the conventional wisdom, but I'm sure glad someone did. So, turns out maybe there is something different going on, and maybe there's some more trust in humanity we can have with each other than thinking we're all just going to yell and be every man for himself. So, well, that wraps up the show for today. This is Dr. Greg Cason and Brian and Tony as well. Thank you, Tony. Bidding you farewell. Be present, be flexible, and be kind.
Till next time.